All right, students, welcome back to part 2 of our unit on the animal kingdom and specifically invertebrates. Where we left off, we had talked about some of the simplest types of invertebrates. We talked about the phylum Porifera and also the phylum Cnidaria. Now we're going to start moving into some of the more significant phyla, including the worms. And many of the adaptations that we see in some of the higher order animals actually get their start with the worms themselves. So the first group we'll look at are the flatworms, or the phyla Platyhelminthes. These contain organisms that are acoelomate. They don't have a special body cavity, that's why they're flat, but they do show 3 distinct tissue layers, and they're organisms that are bilaterally symmetrical, and some of the first organisms that we see that have cephalization. And these include examples like the planaria, fluke, tapeworm. If you look at the planaria here in this slide here, you can see the cephalization. You can see the head with the eye spots there. But they are acoelomate again, so they don't have a body cavity. Here's some other examples. This is the tapeworm, the scolex here with the hooks to attach to the intestine, and then the suckers for getting their food. You can see the pharynx here in the planaria. This is an example of a 2-way digestive system, still very simple organism. Food comes in one opening, goes out the same opening. Now to the diagram of an acoelomate body plan, which you can see here. That's why it's flat, the planaria. No true body cavity, just this rudimentary beginnings of something. The organs are packed in real tight. Now the nematodes, or the roundworms, these are hugely important organisms in the evolutionary history of the world. These are the organisms scientists believe where some significant things being developed, like for example, the 1-way digestive system, which is a huge development, and we can thank the roundworms for that. These guys are pseudocoelomates. They have the beginnings of an actual coelom, but it lacks the lining that you find in true coelomates. But that's how they get that round body shape, because they're very close to having the gut cavity. They have the 1-way digestion, as we mentioned, and they also have complex life cycles. Some examples include hookworms, trichinella, ascaris, which we looked at earlier in the year when we looked at the meiosis slides. Here's an example of a heartworm. It's why it's so important if you have a pet to make sure you give them their regular heartworm pills so they can avoid a terrible situation like this. Now the third group of worms we're going to look at, which are the annelids, they feature the coelomate body plan, the true gut cavity with the lining as well. And we looked at that closely, up close actually, when we looked at the earthworm. The coelom is very significant because it allows space for organs, so you can have organs and complex organ systems. You can have a huge intestine, which can loop back around itself several times like ours. You have space for reproductive organs and also internal fertilization and the development of the young inside the body. So huge development. We see that with the annelids. The annelids are segmented worms. Their name actually literally means little rings. These guys have the true coelom. They have many complex organ systems, including a closed circulatory system with the aortic arches. They have kidney-like structures. They have a 2-part digestive tract with a crop and a gizzard. They have a rudimentary nervous system with a nerve cord and a ganglia. So they're pretty special organisms. In the earthworm in particular, which we looked at for the dissection, as I mentioned, they check off all these significant things: closed circulatory system, rudimentary brain, the aortic arches, the rudimentary kidneys, and the crop, gizzard, and the long intestine for digestion. Remember, the long intestine is important because the longer it is, the more surface area there is for contact with the food that's been digested, so it allows for more time for absorption of the food into the body. Here's some diagrams. The crop first, which is storage, and the gizzard, where it's actually processed. Food enters through the mouth, through the pharynx to the esophagus, where it's stored here before it moves on to the gizzard for full digestion, and through the intestine for absorption and excretion. You can see the ganglia here, and I think a couple of groups were able to see that in the lab last week, which is attached to the ventral nerve cord, which runs the length of the body. Circulatory system, here's the aortic arches, which are the 5 little pumps that help connect the dorsal and ventral blood vessels and pumps the blood throughout the closed circulatory system. Here's some examples of the excretory system, including the nephridia, which is kind of like a kidney, excreting the liquid waste through the skin. Here's some examples. You can see the distinct segmentation of all these examples here. And then the earthworm, of course, as our example species that we dissected. Some more segmented worms. Now moving on to the next group, the mollusks. Their name literally means soft. These guys exhibit bilateral symmetry, have soft bodies. They are coelomates. They have a shell, or maybe a partial shell. It could be external. Some have it internally. They have a specialized structure called the mantle, which covers the body and helps secrete the chemicals which make the shell. They have an adapted foot, depending on the type of species. They have a radula, which is a tongue that's lined with sandpaper, kind of like structure, which allows them to shred up food. And then the visceral mass, which is basically the body of the mollusk that contains the organs. There are three main groups we're looking at: the gastropods, whose name literally means stomach, foot. They have this huge stomach, and then the adapted foot, which is basically designed for crawling along the ground. Very muscular and powerful. Covered, most of them are covered in the shell. You can see the radula here, the tongue that's designed for scraping. Then we have the bivalves, which means two shell. These guys are also known as the pelecypods because pelecipod translates to hatchet foot. But these guys are also bilaterally symmetrical, but they do have the two shells. They have the powerful muscle, which is designed for digging and burrowing. They can clank their shells together to swim, actually. They have these very powerful retractor muscles, which holds the shell together and allows it to open up, but closes down tight when they're in danger of being attacked by predators. You can see the mantle here, which secretes the chemicals that make the shell. And then, of course, on the opposite side, not view here, would be the other part of the shell, hence the name bivalve. The third group, the cephalopods, their name literally means head, foot, because they have this massive head region, and then the foot is adapted as tentacles. You can see this particular organism here. You can see the internal skeleton here. You can see the siphon, which it uses to, basically one of the methods that the cephalopods use to move is by jet propulsion, where they'll take in water and then force it out through a structure also called the excurrent canal, where they'll pump that water out and it shoots them like in a jet in the opposite direction. The tentacles, very important for capturing prey, but also have sensory organs in them. These cephalopods are very smart. They can use tools, they can solve problems. You can see their brain right here. Some even have the ink sac here, when they're in danger. But this is a very clever group, and again, an appropriate name for that large head. And again, these guys, the feet are adapted as tentacles. Here's some pictures of some different mollusks. Last group, the most successful group of animals of all, are the arthropods. These guys exist in the greatest quantity of any animals. These guys are unique in that they have the hardened exoskeleton. They don't have an endoskeleton like we'll see in later animals. They have an exoskeleton on the outside made of a material called chitin, and they feature jointed appendages. That's what their name arthropod actually literally means, jointed legs. Some characteristics include bilateral symmetry, jointed appendages, segmented bodies. Some arthropods have 2 body segments, some have 3. Most have antennae. They have the exoskeleton made of chitin, which they do need to shed from time to time. We call that molting because they outgrow it. You can find them anywhere, and this is the largest phyla of organisms in the animal kingdom. In fact, just the insects alone, scientists hypothesize there can be probably 300 million insects for every human on the planet. So this is a very successful group. They have many incredible adaptations. They're like the Swiss Army knife of the animal kingdom. They can be found everywhere. They can live in land, water, they can fly. Just masters of the planet, really. Different groups include crustaceans. Crustaceans can be found on land and water. They have 2 body segments. They have the abdomen in the back here, and then this is the cephalothorax here. This is what we'll be looking at on Friday when we do our dissection. We'll be looking at the crayfish. Crayfish has many adaptations, including multiple ways to move. They can walk, they can swim. They have walking legs that have become adapted over time into claws, or what we call chelipeds. They have gills for breathing underwater. They have 2 sets of antennae, and you can see the cephalization here in the head region with the compound eyes and the antennae as well. Insects, these guys are the most successful group of all the arthropods. They have 3 body segments, so they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen or tail section. They have 3 pairs of legs. They're the only flying invertebrates. They undergo metamorphosis, which is a huge adaptation because basically what you have in one life cycle of an organism is 2 life cycles, really. You have almost 2 different species, like, for example, the caterpillar and the moth. These are the same organism, but they've gone through a change. In their young larval stage, they eat leaves. As adults, they can fly and go to flowers and get pollen and stuff, so they're not competing with each other for the same limited resources. It's a great adaptation and helps ensure that insects will continue to be successful. Another group includes the myriapods, which are your centipedes and millipedes, known for their many legs. Those that have 2 pairs of legs per segment, those are your millipedes, and you can see the cephalization here. These guys are herbivores, whereas the centipedes are carnivorous. These guys have 1 pair of legs per segment, as you can see here, and you can see the cephalization here. The arachnids, these guys here, another group of arthropods, they have 4 pairs of legs, as you can see, for 8 total legs. They lack the antennae, and they have 2 body segments, again, the cephalothorax and the abdomen, and they have a specialized structure called the book lung, which they use to breathe. Unlike insects, who use a structure called the spiracle, which is a set of tubes that's connected in the abdomen section, which can absorb oxygen from the environment. And so that concludes part 2 of the unit. Be sure to watch both presentations, and don't forget to look over your notes, including the notes from the Miller book that you did with the sub, and the notes that we did together when I returned. Don't forget to review the labs, look over the Miller readings, CK12 readings that were assigned, the practice quizzes at the end of the Miller sections, and also to look over the web quest that we did, which covered the characteristics of the different animal kingdom phyla.